Chapter 15. The King's Cheque. When they all awakened next morning, their first ideas were confused. It is often confusing to wake in a strange bed, much more so when you have flown through the air like the King and Queen and Benson the butler. For her part, the Queen was most perplexed of all, for she was undeniably awake, yet she was not at home, where she had expected to be. However, she was a determined woman and stood to it that nothing unusual was occurring. The butler made up his mind to claim the crown, princeship, and the hand of Lady Molinda, because he was justly remarked to William, here was not such a chance to better himself as he might soon have come his way again. As for the king, he was only anxious to get back to Falkenstein and have the whole situation settled in a constitutional manner. The ambassador was not sorry to get rid of the royal party, and it was proposed that they should all sit down on a fine carpet and wish themselves at home again. But the queen would not hear of it. She said it was childish and impossible. So the carriage was got ready for her, and she started without saying a word of goodbye to anyone. The king, Benson, and the prince were not so particular, and they simply flew back to Falkenstein in the usual way, arriving there at 11:35, a week before Her Majesty. The king at once held a court, and the horns and tail of the monster were exhibited amidst general interest, and Benson and the prince were invited to state their claims. Benson's evidence was taken first. He declined to say exactly where or how he killed the fire drake. There might be more of them left, he remarked, young ones that would take a lot of killing, and he refused to part with his secret. Only he claimed the reward, which was offered, if you remember, not to the man who killed the beast, but to him who brought its horns and tail. This was allowed by Loris Pricen to be a very sound law, and Benson was cheered by his courtiers, who decidedly preferred him to Prigio, and who, besides, thought he was going to be crown prince. As for Lady Molinda, she was torn by the most painful feelings, for much as she hated Prigio, she could not bear the idea of marrying Benson. Yet one or the other choice seemed certain. Unhappy lady. Perhaps no girl was ever more strangely beset by misfortune. Prince Prigio was now called to speak. He admitted that the reward was offered in bringing the horns and tail, not for killing the monster. But were the king's intentions to go for nothing? When a subject only meant well, of course he had to suffer, but when a king said one thing and he was not supposed to have meant another, any fellow with a wagon could bring the horns and tail. The difficult thing was to kill the monster. If Benson's claim was allowed, the royal prerogative of saying one thing and meaning something else was in danger. On hearing this argument, the king so far forgot himself as to cry, "Bravo! Well said!" and to clap his hands, whereupon all the courtiers shouted and threw up their hats. The prince then said that whoever killed the monster could, of course, tell where to find him, and could bring his hoofs. He was ready to do this himself. Was Mr. Benson equally ready? On this being interpreted to him, for he did not speak Pentuflin, Benson grew pale with horror, but fell back on the proclamation. He had brought the horns and tail, and so he must have the prerequisites, and the Lady Molinda. The king's mind was so much confused by this time that he determined to leave it to Lady Molinda herself. "Which of them will you have, my dear?" he asked in a kind voice. The poor Molinda merely cried. Then his Majesty was almost driven to say that he would give the reward to whoever produced the hooves by the next week. But no sooner had he said this than the prince brought them out of his wallet and displayed them in the open court. This ended the case, and Benson, after being entertained with sherry and sandwiches in the steward's room, was sent back to his master. And I regret to say that his temper was not at all improved by his failure to better himself. On the contrary, he was unusually cross and disagreeable for several days, but we must, perhaps, make some allowance for his disappointment. But if Benson was irritated and suffered from the remarks of his fellow servants, I do not think we can envy Prince Prigio. Here he was, restored to his position indeed, but by no means to the royal favor, for the king disliked him as much as ever, and was as angry as ever about the deaths of Enrico and Alfonso. Nay, he was even more angry, perhaps not without reason. He called up Prigio before the whole court, and thereupon the courtiers cheered like anything, but the king cried, "Silence! MacDougall, drag the first man that shouts to the serpent house in the zoological gardens and lock him up with the rattlesnakes." After that, the courtiers became very quiet. "Prince," said the king as Prigio bowed before him, "you are restored to your position, because I cannot break my promise. But your base and malevolent nature is even more conspicuously manifest in your selfish success than in your previous dastardly contempt for duty. Why, confound you!" cried the king, dropping his high style in which he had been speaking, and becoming the father, not the monarch. "Why, if you could kill the fire drake, did you let your poor brothers go and be broiled? What do you say, you sneak? You didn't believe there were fire drakes? This just comes of your eternal conceit and arrogance. If you were clever enough to kill the creature, and I admit you were clever enough to know that everybody must be true, you have not generally found it so. Well, you have this time, and let it be a lesson to you. Not that there is much comfort in that, for it is not likely that you will ever have such another chance." Exactly the idea that had occurred to Benson. Here the king wept, among the tears of the Lord Chief Justice and Poet Laureate, who had been awfully frightened when he heard the rattlesnakes, maids of honor and chaplain royal, and everyone but Colonel MacDonald, a Scottish soldier of fortune who maintained a military reserve. When His Majesty had recovered, he said to Prigio, who had not been crying, as he was too much absorbed, "King's word is his bond. Bring me a pen and my royal checkbook." The royal checkbook, bound in red morocco, was brought in by 8 pages with ink and a pen. His Majesty then filled and signed the following satisfactory documents. My children, I wish Mr. Arrowsmith would do as much for me. Number WOB 961047. Falkenstein, July 10th, 1768. The Bank of Pantuflia, Falkenstein Bridge. Paid to Prince Prigio of the order of 10,000 persons. £1,000,000. Revenue R. "There," said His Majesty, crossing his cheque and throwing sand over it, for blotting paper had not yet been invented. "There, take it, and be off with you." Prince Prigio was respectfully but rapidly obeying his royal command, for he thought he had better cash the royal cheque as soon as possible, when His Majesty yelled, "Hey, here, come back! I forgot something. You've got to marry Molinda."